Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to focus in on basically one line, super props. What does it do? What does super do? And then also, why do we need to pass in props / do we always need to pass in props? So I mentioned in the last video, if you're at all shaky about this stuff and you don't want to confuse yourself with some more sort of technical details, it's safe to just always put super props at the top of every constructor you write in a React component. But if you want to understand why and why sometimes you don't have to pass props in, we'll learn in this video. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is what we're doing right here. Every time we make a component, we are extending from React.component, the base component class. And that's really important because if we don't do that, we miss a ton of React functionality. This is how we actually make a React component. Otherwise, if we just did class game and left this off, we would just be defining our own class and ignoring all of React. So if we step out of React world for just a moment and mimic our own component class, imagine this is the React component class, all that I have in the constructor is a simple console.log that says inside component constructor. So now imagine I'm defining my own React component called game, and it extends our silly little component class. And it has its own constructor, and this constructor is going to console.log inside, we'll call it game constructor. Okay, so we have two classes, game, which extends component. So I just ran my snippet, so I now have access to these classes, and I'm going to try making a new game called chess. What do we think will happen? Oh no, we get an error. So you might think a constructor is called when we initialize a new game, and this should be printed out. Unfortunately, we get an error. It says must call super constructor in derived class before basically doing anything. So the problem here is that we're extending this class, but we never actually call its constructor. And that's a really important thing we have to do inside of our own constructor. Inside of the game constructor, we need to make sure we're calling the class that we're extending. We need to call its own constructor, which is in the component class. So in React, this is super important because that's how we call all of the magic setup stuff that React does and takes care of for us right out of the box. So we call super, just like this. So now if I rerun my snippet and I try making chess again, this time, if we ignore all these annoying messages, we get inside component constructor. Okay, great. And then inside game constructor. So this just shows us we're running the code in the component constructor and in the game constructor in our case. So that is important to understand about super. But now let's talk about super props and why we have to do that. And in order to talk about that, let's go to a real React application. Okay, so I have a demo component that I've made. It has nothing in it, just our basic skeleton. It returns demo component as an H1. And in my app.js, I'm going to make a new demo component. So let's do that now. And let's pass some props in, like we'll set animal equal to bobcat, and we'll set food equal to, I don't know, pineapple. Something like that. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so now we have two props. What is essentially happening here is that we are making a new demo. You can think of it sort of like this, new demo, and then we're passing in an object that says animal is bobcat. I won't type the whole thing out. And then food is pineapple. So the props are just an object that are being passed in. Now over in our demo component, if we need to write a constructor, which we haven't had to do so far if we're just working with props, but as soon as we introduce state and we're making a stateful component, we do. And our constructor is going to take an argument called props. And if I just call super, which we just saw earlier why we need to do that, we're just making sure we call the constructor in the base component. That's all fine and good. And if we save, we should see over here our first demo component. This is coming from our component from the last video. We can ignore that. So we see demo component. That's great. Now, if I want to print out this .props inside of here, console.log this.props. Seems like that shouldn't be a problem. However, if we go over here, I have it open, it looks like props is undefined. And if we go to the React tab over here, where are you? We'll see that as we look at, there's a lot to, let me zoom out a bit. This is a little crazy looking. If we look at our demo, there are props. It says props, animal, bobcat, food, pineapple. So the DevTools knows there's props. Why is it not printing out? I console.log props, this.props, it gave me undefined. Okay, so what's happening here is that if we want access to this.props in the constructor, we have to pass props in here. And this is kind of bizarre because we've had access to props before. We've been able to do this. Let's do in this h1, I'm just going to do this dot props dot animal. And I'm actually going to undo what I just did up here, get rid of super props. We've been doing this all along since the beginning of the course, and there's no problem. It prints out Bobcat, or it renders Bobcat. So why is that happening? It's more React magic behind the scenes. So React is giving us this dot props. It basically makes it for us automatically, and we have access to it in any of the methods inside of this class except the constructor. And if we want to access in the constructor, we need to do super props. Okay, so I changed this back to this dot props dot animal. I save everything, and now we can see that our props are printing out from the constructor, and we have access to them in render. Okay, so if we're using props inside of the constructor, we have to do super props. Otherwise, if we're not, if we're just setting state, for example, if we're doing this dot state equals something, let's just say it's empty to start, we can get rid of that, and there's no problem. We still have access to everything. If I add a property in here like color and set that to cyan, I have access to it right here, this dot state dot color. So I don't have to do anything special. It's only if I need props inside of the constructor, I need to make sure I'm adding it in here. So it's a good rule of thumb. It's pretty standard just to put super props at the top. And just to reiterate, if I don't do super at all, that's a whole other issue. Because if I go over here now, you'll see cannot set property state of undefined. There is no this if I'm not calling the super constructor. So I need to make sure I have super at the very least. And if I want to use props in the constructor, I pass in props. If I'm not using props in the constructor, I'm just using it down here or in some other instance method, then it's totally fine to just do super. But again, this is pretty standard just to do. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too convoluted and crazy. I know it can be confusing, but it shouldn't hold you back because remember, just put this at the top and call it a day. All right, next we're gonna learn how to actually alter or change the values in state. That's next.